I'm Brandon Powell on the Best Hour of the Day podcast, where we're talking about being healthy, happy, and strong with the Wim Hof method.
Turns out between us, we have one of those things, and we need to work with this guy today at the workshop to get all three.
Yeah, this is a really, really cool. We did Mark England, now here with Brandon Powell. You guys missed out on this workshop if you aren't here. We'll try to do more of them. But yeah, hopefully I will gain some happiness out of this. If not, I'll have to get a new partner. But stick around. We'll see you guys there. Welcome to the Best Hour of Their Day podcast with your hosts, Jason Fernandez.
And me, Jason Ackerman. With more than 20 years in the business,
As both coaches and affiliate owners,
our passion is to help create world-class affiliates
and coaches by building
better
boxes.
Welcome to
The best hour of your day.
Welcome back to Best Hour of Their Day. Another special guest. We're here at CrossFit Rife. We've got the Enlifted workshop, Brandon Powell, Level 3 Wim Hof instructor, and the Enlifted breath coach here with us today. Recently we had Mark England on.
Yep.
You're a good buddy. I want to hear all about the shenanigans you got into in 6th grade. But you're here to coach a lot of breath work with us today and get us into the cold water.
That's right.
Yeah, I have so many questions because like the breath work, the ice, cold plunge, whatever you want. What is the technical term for that, by the way? Immersion? Cold immersion?
Yeah, cold immersion.
Okay, got it.
Or cold exposure.
Cold exposure, got it. So that's obviously, I think it's not new, obviously. It is.
Cold water's been around for a while.
Right.
Yeah.
I was like,
1950?
breathing is also not new. Yeah, we've been doing that for a while. But I think it's become more and more accessible because of different tools that like it's easier to get kind of assets to create that environment.
Ice in a
bathtub. But like cold plunge where it's just like I don't have to go buy ice and all that kind of stuff. I can just have we have a cold plunge.
I would say it's become more normal.
Cold plunge businesses have grown.
Yeah.
Right. So
And I think a lot of that has to do with Wim Hof.
For
no,
sure.
I don't think anybody could
I
do
think
that.
he brought it into I think what you're saying is it's become mainstream.
It's become mainstream, and then when it becomes mainstream, it becomes more accessible to people because there's a market around it, and all of a sudden more people get exposed to it, and they can do it. So I want to dive into all that. But we want to kind of talk about your story. So, and Mark, of all the things he said he was going to talk about, he did not talk about
He
how
sent
you
me
guys,
a text.
Did he?
Yeah, he was like, please talk about that.
Well, and Marcus made it on the ride here today. Marcus, you got to talk about how they met. And I didn't realize it goes all the way back to elementary school.
Yeah.
So where'd you guys grow up?
In Richmond, Virginia.
Oh, so local. You guys are you're local as well.
Yeah, local, but we both moved around.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's kind of like it's full circle in some strange
Imagine
way.
running into this guy and Mark in 6th grade. These guys were like the crazy kids for sure.
Well, it's interesting that you bring that. Well, actually, it's so here's the deal. We were both in this developmental education program in 6th grade. They extracted students from various elementary schools that were coming into this middle school and put us into this new program that was supposed to help us
That's
become...
called juvenile detention.
Exactly, man. I'm trying to sweeten it up a little bit, but ultimately, it was like the Breakfast Club.
Yeah.
And
I can see you. You were the guy smoking the cigarette outside.
I was in a similar club, and I looked around, it was just a bunch of athletes, and we were all bad at math, and I was like, I don't think this is a developmental
Mom, you
group.
sold this to me.
Yeah, it was an awkward time, to say the least, man, to be going into middle school, right? And then to be exclusively, how you moved around, you switched classes. We weren't allowed to do that.
You were the same kids all day long.
We were the same kids all day long, and except for our homeroom class, I think we split up because that's alphabetical, right? But yeah, it was meant to keep us with fewer teachers and to help us to try and get organized. We were definitely the rambunctious kids, but those kids. And I say this, we're uniquely connected. We've had relationships throughout the years, and I've seen them go on to become amazing people. Mark being one in particular, and Mark is he's an amazing human. He really goes as far as he can for the people that he he cares about and he loves, and he's passionate about his business as he could be. And, you know, he and I have had this kind of parallel path even when we went our separate ways, because I moved away from Richmond in my high school years, and Mark stayed there. But we were both martial artists. And Mark actually really influenced me. He was one of the very first people who I saw fight in a cage. In a ring, in a cage. You know, he was ahead of the game, like 17, 18 years old, and, you know, already fighting and competing. And it was a big motivator for me to really step up my game back then and to push. And, you know, so we've had an interesting relationship, and then our businesses just happened to coincide, and I'd say initially it was organically, but knowing him, he had something he was working in his head the whole time. He saw the angle, and we just kept bringing the work together, and they've grown. The workshops have grown. And I mean, obviously, he's developed a successful business that's incorporated breath work and various things that I can implement my work into right away. But then when we bring the whole package together like we're doing today, you're going to see something really special.
Yeah, there's for anybody, if you missed it, you blew it. Sorry. There's going to be like 100 people here today. It's like from
amazing.
So all day. Yeah. So Mark's going to do his magic. You're going to do your magic. We're going to have a little powwow at the end of that.
Get cold at the end.
Yeah, we're going to get cold at the end.
Super, and I was telling you before this, as someone who, I've been diving into Wim Hof, and I read Breath. You've read the James Nestor, yeah. And, you know, I have a cold plunge in my house. I'm super excited because I think it's one of those things where you can get so far online. You can get so far listening to a book, reading stuff, watching YouTube videos, but actually experience it. It's kind of like CrossFit.
Yeah.
You show up in your garage and you learn this thing, then you go to an affiliate and you're like, oh, this is how it really works.
Yeah, you get like an additional 80%.
And I've been snatching wrong for the last 10 years. Right? So I'm really excited to see what that, to a practice that I already have.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more about that. And I mean, so initially when I got involved in this, it was totally for my own benefit, selfish reasons, you know, and I initially got involved with Wim Hof. I guess I was looking for something, but you know, I had an idea. Being a martial artist, I knew that breath work would be a powerful tool to always implement, and I looked at Wim as a form of optimization. And, you know, when I first started, he had just kind of gained some exposure in the United States, and through Laird Hamilton, I heard about him.
Surfer,
and
right?
Yeah. And so I heard Laird mention him. I went online, looked him up, found a course that he had just released, took that course, you know, and fell in love with the practice immediately, and was like, I gotta find Wim. Just, you know, that's my MO.
When was this? How long ago?
This was 2000 and, 15.
Okay, so
yeah, 2015.
7, 8 years
well,
ago.
How do you even get to that point where you start thinking about breath work? Because I'm trying to remember how I think I was initially exposed to it via Mike Bledsoe. Like it's the first time I ever
the early
did
adopter versus
I know, right? But
now
how do you even where
Right.
do you even find that as an early adopter? You know what I mean?
Well, breath work in the practices that I do, it's always been there. I was introduced to yoga when I was 12.
I was gonna say that's probably
from a crazy
most common
aunt.
on-ramp, probably.
Yeah. I had
Not
a
the
cool
crazy
aunt.
aunt, the yoga, yeah.
Well, yes. Yeah.
Doing like ujjayi breath type of thing, like deep nasal
just
breathing.
all different forms of pranayama.
Yeah.
You know, looking at, just for me, it's always about technique. So it's like, how many techniques can I amass? This was just the exposure of doing hatha yoga or in any of the various forms. Wim's practice is bhakti yoga, but there was all of these various, I guess, introductions to breath work through different practices, meditations, jiu-jitsu being a big one, because if you don't get your breath under control in jiu-jitsu, you'll never make it past the first year.
That's what Mark and I spoke about briefly. Like, we talked about being calm and taking your breath. I'm like, nothing will teach you that better than getting choked. And finding that.
Absolutely.
We're talking about somebody has a body
Or just
triangle, they're
pressure.
choking. Right. Yeah, I mean, in the jiu-jitsu world, you don't want to tap to pressure, Fern. It's kind of a stigma that will follow you around. But, joking, like somebody just has, Steve Haydock, one of our coworkers, notorious, can just put so much pressure on you, like you feel like you're suffocating.
Yeah.
And that's where you need to find that just enough space to relax and breathe.
Right.
And so you realize in your jiu-jitsu practice,
Absolutely.
this
Well,
would help.
Hickson Gracie.
Yeah, you go watch him on the Joe Rogan podcast, or read his book.
Yeah, or what I saw was back in '96. There was a documentary that he released called Choke.
Yep.
Yeah,
and
That's fantastic.
it is absolutely. He was so ahead of the game with cross training and bringing in various elements to optimize his jiu-jitsu.
I think the cover of his book is actually him sitting there. Breathing.
Yeah. Well, so many people are interested in his breath, and to be honest, there are aspects of my own personal breath training that are very similar to that, and that we bring into our workshops. So the breath training is, in a sense, it's vast, but there's always this, similarity. I mean, it's breathing. It's in and out.
There's some pretty common themes there.
Yeah,
Inhale, exhale. Those are big ones.
Points of performance.
and then the spaces between the breaths, right? Either at the top of the inhale or the bottom of the exhale, right? So you can feel places where, and this is places that we explore in the Wim Hof method, or with the breath holds. Breath holds being a really interesting part and great for performance, building red blood cell.
Right.
There are lots of reasons to train in a hypoxic state, and to gain the benefits just like you would in altitude, right?
Well, number one being, at some point you're going to have to. Like if you're in life, at some point you're going to find yourself in that scenario, whether it's sport or training like this. You will find yourself in a hypoxic state, and knowing how to navigate that, how to deal with it, both psychologically but physiologically. That's important, right? To not, like we talk about it in CrossFit, which is like, severe deficiency in any one of these given 10 general physical skills would lead to a loss of game, mission, or life. Breath would be one of them. If somebody just like loses complete composure in whatever it might be, you lose your general awareness of your surroundings, of what's happening. If it's a competition, you make a mental error, or it's a true emergency. And I'll give you an, so like I was a rescue swimmer in the Navy for a long time, and when you go through that training, they put you through some, definitely not the hardest training in the military, but there's some pretty aggressive scenarios there, and you watch people who in the water, you have a snorkel and you're doing all this stuff, and you watch people, they start to have that panic attack, and they start to do things that literally don't make sense. Oh yeah, and a lot of it has to do with like, we're in the water. This is always a scenario like you're supposed to be the person rescuing somebody, and then they start messing with you, and it turns into water wrestling, essentially. And all of a sudden, the rescue swimmer starts drowning because in that state of not being able to calm down and just breathe, spits his snorkel out. And I'm like, that's literally the only thing that's keeping you alive right now. Mm-hmm. And just out of pure, just not knowing what he was doing, spits his snorkel out, starts drowning. They have to save the lifesaver now. And I'm like, that would be a perfect example of just like learning how to control your breath so you don't do something as basic as spit your snorkel out when you're underwater. Yeah, well, panic creates some amazing mental states. Yeah. It's interesting how, you find people who become, who are exposed in an environment and freeze to death. Mm-hmm. You'll find them without any clothes on. Oh yeah, because they just kind of like strip down. Yeah. They begin to feel like they're burning up. Right. The breath helps us thermoregulate, which is a really interesting thing, right? So when we overheat, essentially we're done, and that's what breaks us down when in anything. Could be a set, your final rep. Mm-hmm. You can't get it done because you're overheated, essentially, right? And so the breath can really help us to learn to thermoregulate, and you can use specific techniques even within that
creating vocalizations through the breathing that will either heat the breath, or cool the breath. And I only bring this up because, it's interesting when you see people go through panic states, right? They go into specific breathing patterns that will lend towards that overheating to essentially, they burn up quick. And so that's a great reason to train breath work, right? Is to understand processes like this.
That's cool.
So you and Mark, 6th grade, you said you moved away in high school. What led to coming back and getting involved in creating the Enlifted program?
Facebook.
Social media's had some positive.
There's one thing. There's the one thing.
Was it Facebook or MySpace?
It was Facebook. Yeah, I was on MySpace too. As a failed musician, believe me, I had a long career with MySpace.
Found each other on iMessenger.
Well,
no, it was weird. He reached out to me. He found me on Facebook, and Mark he's one of those guys that really. He cares about his friends, cares about his people, and I'm super grateful that he did reach back out to me. And we, it's been within the last decade, and I'd say it's been about a decade now since we connected over Facebook, and it was just like no time had passed, back to being.
The two delinquents.
Exactly.
Again, yeah.
Yeah, and I thrived as a delinquent through my middle school years.
So did we. Don't worry. We still do.
Those are fun days. Yeah.
My MO might have been a little bit wilder than Mark's initially, but believe me, man, Mark grew into Mr. Popularity back in the day for sure. And like I said, he was really ahead of the game, in the mixed martial arts scenario, which, that's a tough world. Mark and I
especially back then,
because there was no sanctioning.
It was
there was
crude.
no.
It was. You would be better off being like, hey, mom, dad, I'm getting into porn, right? than saying I'm going to get into mixed martial arts.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and but who would have known, right? And he was great at bringing it all together because Mark was a great stand-up fighter, and then he had submission skills as well. So he was really bringing it together. And like I said, this was. I mean, I don't want to date myself, but I mean, it was, almost 20 years ago.
Yeah. So a lot of what we discussed yesterday about, mindset, and, him and Kim were saying things like, this is outside of the fitness world. And what we believe is all of this is really part of the fitness world, especially the breathwork piece.
Yeah.
I mean, they can't live exclusively. If you're in a fitness affiliate, you're breathing. And if you're in a fitness, CrossFit affiliate, you should be not only breathing, but thinking about your breathing, just like you're thinking about what you're thinking, as Mark would say. So where do you begin with this? When you find Wim Hof and you were saying you needed to learn more, where did you begin?
Well, breathing to me is the lowest, most accessible fruit on the tree for training, right? So if anybody that's breathing can breathe, essentially, right? So, breathing is always there, right in the side of our consciousness. I mean, all we have to do is think about breathing, and then it becomes front and center, right? And so breathing to me was something that made sense. I think with Wim, it was wanting to learn how to approach the cold too, because I had a massive fascination with that.
From what about it?
Well, I just enjoy the cold.
In general.
In general.
But you live in Virginia now.
No, I actually live in North Carolina now.
So even warmer.
Yeah, potentially, yeah. But I spend a lot of time in the mountains.
I was gonna say you got to come out to visit in Colorado.
Oh man, well, and I've been out there, and I love the West Coast. We're in Jackson every year snowboarding. So I mean, I love to snowboard, and I love to be out in the cold. Just the exposure. I mean. It could be any time. I love to run, so being outside, running in the cold is good for me as well.
What do you love? So most people will do their best to avoid cold. What did you find so fascinating about it?
Me, I hate the cold.
Yeah. I mean,
I don't know.
I'm trying to get him to move the headquarters to Colorado. He won't do it.
It's not happening.
To me, it's not really just about the cold. I spent years right out of high school. I went to work as a mason. I learned first I was a laborer, then I became a mason, and I really wanted that trade, and wanted to work, and that I had a focus in stone masonry, sculpting. It was a big fascination of mine back then for years. And so I could be in extreme heat, extreme cold, but I was exposed all the time. So, through the seasons, you always had to work. And I was outdoors all the time. So I just got really used to it. It never really bothered me one way or the other. I could be in the middle of summer sweating, or I could be freezing in the cold. Either one I could stand and just kept doing. So to me, and I really consider myself someone who loves the water. So, absolutely love the water. So the idea of cold water was kind of freaky, doing these types of exposures, but it's still, I don't know, internally it just made sense to me. I don't really know how to explain it. Seeing Wim just gave me this sense, initially, like seeing his movements, like there's a martial art component here. It's like an internal thing. Mm-hmm. And having exposure to Qigong, Tai Chi, various, let's say, internal martial arts, I just recognized this. And then seeing him do things like swim under ice sheets and for record distance and, all these various things, climbing mountains in very
Barefoot.
Little clothes, or, just being exposed completely. It really, I recognized it as something that was very ancient, very, it lends towards antiquity and to this idea that, Wim is not doing anything new. He's tapped into something that's actually very, very old, as old as we are.
It's like the modern day monk,
in a way, and he's the anti-guru, though. I mean, he's not trying to lead anybody, but he's wanting the direct experience. It's very shamanic, man, because it is a direct experience type of thing, and that's what makes it so visceral and so awesome. Is like, yes, you're doing the breath work, but the cold actually is like the sparring. The cold is like we would have rolling in jiu-jitsu or in any type of sparring in martial arts. You want to know it's going to work. And the cold gives you a real impetus to test it against and to know, like, this is something that is going to, something I have to deal with. You can't run away from it. You have to take it on.
One of the things I find really interesting about breathwork in general is how fast you can get the change that you're kind of playing around with. So the first time I was really ever exposed to this, I took a free diving course in 2006, maybe 7. Went down to Miami for like 4 days, and you start in the pool. So it's a free diving course. You don't get into deep water until the last day. You spend the first 3 days in the pool. No actual diving. And I think I went from a 45-ish, maybe a little bit longer, let's call it a minute and a half, breath hold. And then by the 4th day, I was easily doing over 5-minute breath hold in just 4 days by just working through the breath holds, and that was my first real exposure to this is not something that takes for mastery for anything takes a very long time, but for the average person you can have significant impact by just starting to play around with it. And that was my first exposure to that. I was like, this is incredible.
I imagine it's because we're breathing all the time. It's not like you're learning a skill. I've never done this in 40 years.
But it's interesting. We're all breathing, but then come to find out, none of us actually know how to do it. We're doing it, but you're you don't actually know what you're doing.
That was fascinating about that book by James Nestor. Just the difference between, when we had our baby, I was, shutting our mouth all the time, and my wife's, yelled at me for doing that. I'm like, you don't understand. It's going to be so bad for her one day. But yesterday, Fern kind of mentioned to Mark, he's like, a lot of people will listen to this and be like, this is voodoo or hocus pocus.
Yeah.
And I think people feel the same way sometimes about, you watch Wim and you're like, they shot him with hepatitis and he killed it, right? Right? So,
but something.
Yeah, not everything was hepatitis, but I think people think oh, that guy's crazy, and he's 1 in a billion. I can't do that.
But that's
what I want to hear.
Yeah,
like
yeah.
Fern's saying, like
So
4
I'll
days
draw
later.
full circle.
Yeah.
So I mean, so what made the Wim Hof method specifically was that Wim took an injection of endotoxin, which is
It wasn't hepatitis.
It wasn't hepatitis.
I just remember watching the
He
video.
would
They're
be
like,
the one-
he killed it. Yeah.
He would be the one that would be like, yeah, give me hepatitis.
And then
I'll
with the whole
beat it.
COVID thing, like he was like, I'm not getting like his breath work is that powerful.
Absolutely. Well, and I feel like I can say now so the method was developed in 2012. Let's say it was put a stamp on. This is now a method, right? Backed by researched science and essentially it became published in scientific journals that this will influence your autonomic nervous system, which was thought to be something that we couldn't do, right? So Wim took an endotoxin injection, and which is an inert bacteria, hits the system, and it sets off the triggers that the flu or, say, food poisoning or something like that, E. coli poisoning, would do, which is basically markered effects like, fever and nausea and so forth, right? All of these things that come along, inflammation, essentially, the cytokine storm, as you might have heard before, right? So what Wim demonstrated was that with priming his body with his breath work for the 20 minutes, then taking the injection, that he could severely resist the injection, but then also his body didn't produce the inflammation that everyone else in the control group, which had been like 1,000+ people had done this prior to him.
And he was the
and
one
then
person.
He came in and showed that, essentially through toning the system, that he could resist this and that it would show up as, the body not reacting in the way that it would autonomically, with basically releasing an overabundance of protection. Wim dialed all that back. And obviously they did it through testing his blood. There was a lot of interesting tests that coincide with this same thing, like injecting his blood outside of his body after he had primed his breath with his breath. So he did the breath work. They extract the blood, put the endotoxin in that blood, and his blood still resisted the endotoxin. So it's about doing exactly that, which is affecting the blood through the breath, along with obviously the rest of the body. It's all an organic whole, but I'm just saying the blood shows up. And so what made it an actual method was the reproduction of results through another group that he trained for 4 days. They trained totally, I think, overall for 8 days, 4 with him, 4 without. And he trained him at his house and took him up onto the mountain, and it's all been videoed. You can watch that original group, and these were all untrained people who hadn't worked with Wim prior, and they reproduced basically his results in the lab against a control group of 12 who didn't have the technique. So, and they all, the 12 without the technique, were promised to learn the technique afterwards. That was their reward, I guess. But they all got sick, and Wim's group didn't. And so what we know now after 10 years of dedicated research by the same university that initially studied Wim, the Radboud University in the Netherlands, is that the Wim Hof method will reduce flu symptoms up to 80%.
Wow. Whether you have it or obviously beforehand is more ideal, like training, making it a part of your life.
Yeah, I mean, using it as a technique, whether it's for maintenance, right? Which means just maintaining the breath work. I do it every day. Did it before I came here.
What's for people listening? What's a minimum effective dose? How long?
If I was going to give you my opinion on it, I'd say you want to get at the practice completely 20 to 30 minutes.
It's not unreasonable amount of
every day.
Every day. Well, that's how I do it.
Not an unreasonable amount of time to be healthy.
Right.
Well, that's where I was going to go with
It sets up
that.
my whole day.
Well,
so even traveling like today, sorry.
Best time to do it.
You need to, like, when you don't want to do it, that's when you need
Right.
to
Well,
do it.
you're under stressors from outside variables
That's
that are
right.
not normal.
So you showed up with your wife, 17 years, you said? You just 12-year anniversary?
Yeah.
That's Kim?
Yes.
That's your wife? So you guys, and I assume she does the practice
She does.
alongside you? So
Yeah, and she would back me up in regards to how much it helped through pregnancy.
for her.
Well, that's
Yeah,
where I was
yeah.
going with all of this. Is
Yeah.
like I think there's two obvious components of this that if somebody's watching this, like, why is this relevant? Number one is obviously the past couple years has been more than wacky, but this kind of falls right into the sickness, wellness, fitness continuum of how do I hedge my bets on all things, which is like, making sure I keep my diet in check, making sure I'm training and moving my body the way that's supposed to be taken care of, and then obviously this is like sprinkles on the top of that is like, hey, learn to control your breath to basically supercharge your immune system. Obviously, you can't beat everything by breathing.
Well,
but
we brought a few different diseases here that we're going to inject you with. We want to see you kill them.
But that's my point is like you can slowly start to add all these things in that would mitigate a lot of the stuff that a lot of people are worried about. And I'm like, you don't need to be walking around in a state of fear. Like you can hedge your bets on all of these and just obviously.
You know what I hear from both talking to Brandon and Mark yesterday is CrossFitters notoriously, give me more. And they'll put 3 hours of training in when their body doesn't need 3 hours of training. And we often say, like, hey, give me one hard workout, maybe two, and that's it. Like, find some other things. You want to truly, if you're doing CrossFit for the right reasons, it's health, right?
Right.
Work capacity across broad time
I'm
and
not
modal
trying to
domains.
exercise fast to pay my mortgage.
Right,
Yeah.
throughout years of your life. I want to be healthy. I want to be doing this stuff when I'm 80, 90, 100. Well, rather than doing that third and fourth workout today, how about you take an hour a day, dedicate 30 minutes to breath, 30 minutes to mindset and reframing some of the ways you're thinking, and it sounds like you'll be a much healthier, happier, better person. I imagine when you don't do this stuff, Kim's like, honey,
that's the Wim Hof ethos, man. The ethos is happy, healthy, strong.
There we go. There we go.
And this is something where you can really, you don't want it to sound generic, but the idea is that all things that we're looking for fit into those categories, especially as people who are looking to optimize and to be the best versions of ourselves, right? When I wanted to touch on something you just said, but the method specifically has these, I guess, three components. You have the mindset, which to me is the ultimate component. And I'll come back on that. But then you have the breath work and the cold exposure. The mindset to me, because Wim always says everything is about the mind. And so he's demonstrated. They put him into a suit that trapped water along the surface of his skin, so it's like the reverse of a wetsuit.
Right.
The suit is on the outside, the water's on the inside, right? And it circulated 50-degree water over the surface of his skin. They put him in an fMRI. They wanted to study his brain in relation to the in relation to his technique, obviously.
Hey guys, Nicole Christensen here with Dave Kalina, founder of O2. So I own CrossFit Roots in Boulder, Colorado, and over the years we've had a vetting process for anything that we're gonna carry in our store, and really our guiding principle has been, I never wanted any of our members to have to say no to something every day that they walked by, like have to resist the urge for I'm carrying a paleo brownie or something like that. So there were things that we were just never gonna carry. Like we're never gonna carry Monster Energy and have people say no to that every time. But O2 is definitely different. So one of the reasons is that it's a pure drink. It's natural. It doesn't have sugar, 1 gram of sugar. So Dave, talk to us a little bit about O2.
I mean, that was great.
And and then also about the deal with Best Hour.
Yeah, so the easiest way to think about O2 is a cleaner, healthier sports drink.
Yes.
And so, like Nicole said, it's only got 1 gram of sugar per can, 15 calories total, and no artificial ingredients. So there's nothing you can't pronounce on the side of the label. Everything's non-GMO approved, which we're really proud of, and it's in a can because single-use plastic sucks. And so that's O2 in a nutshell. It's also twice as efficacious as Gatorade. So we have twice the electrolytes as Gatorade, but again, only 1 gram of sugar. So better for you, healthier, and I know I'm biased, but I think it tastes awesome.
So
too.
you can have electrolytes without sugar.
Totally.
Shocking.
Totally.
Shocking.
Imagine that, right?
Check it out, guys.
So they had him do it without applying any technique at all. And they had a control group who basically showed these kind of effects where, you would have your body would try to warm against the cold, and then it would get cold. And then it would do it again, up and down, like a spike and then a valley. And what you would see is that each time it would go a little lower and wouldn't get quite as warm, and a little lower, not quite as warm, until you're losing core body temperature, you're losing skin surface temperature, and they would take you out. Well, they had Wim do it, and he shows up, and he gets as cold as everybody else. He gets warm, he gets cold. The only difference with him in the control group is he spikes a little warmer, but he also spikes a little colder. So he goes up and down, right? Then they tell him the next day, apply your technique, do your thing. And he maintained surface skin temperature. So basically his heat went up, and it just stayed there. And he maintained surface skin temperature for over 30 minutes in an fMRI in this suit. So he's not doing anything physical. He's just laying there. He's humming. He's humming to himself. He is utilizing an aspect of the brain called the periaqueductal gray. And this is a part of the brain that directly connects to our centers of joy and pain relief. It's funny how those two things go together, right? And Wim would be the first to say, it's in the mind and it's feeling. And this is something we're really going to get into today, because what we try to cue and tap into is the emotional body in utilization for, again, I always use the word optimization, but it's to bring out the best version of ourselves by the method sort of works in various ways. Initially, it's kind of like a purging, it cleans everything out, and then you can utilize it as it's sort of like cleaning the junk out, and then everything's running as it should, right? And we can always come back. Whenever the junk builds back up, you can always use the method to help to balance. I mean, the cold gives you a 250% increase in dopamine. It's the single best way to take advantage of endogenous dopamine, testosterone. I mean, we get so much chemicals and hormones beneficial that come from this practice, right? The breath work taps us into our serotonin, oxytocin. It's just the full, medicine cabinet, essentially, that we can, utilize, that's accessible to us through our system. So
it's like hitting the reset button on Tecmo Bowl and Nintendo when Bo Jackson breaks his leg.
Control Alt Delete, right?
Oh, the Raiders, we're going, and he breaks his leg, like reset. I'm starting over.
Well, because and this is what a lot of people are interested in the method because of its abilities to help you get in to investigate non-local spaces within your mind. And I mean this, like, we know that essentially what's happening, and I could draw a relationship back to jiu-jitsu, we're depleting blood in certain areas, and we are forcing it into other areas, right? And so you get this prefrontal cortex and really aspects of the brain just shutting down. And this is really good for people who are hardwired into these parts of the mind, So we get this effect that's akin to a psychedelic experience in some ways, where
David will love this.
The brain is based. Well, that's what we know that's going on within, say, the psychedelic experience, is that the brain is basically going offline. But that doesn't shut the mind down, interestingly enough.
That's...
You know what I mean? The brain is shutting down, but the mind is really going. And you get to explore these, like I said, these non-local, non-linear, transpersonal spaces in the method. Now, it doesn't always have to be like that when you use the method, but you can definitely go into these spaces when doing the breath work. And most people wouldn't know that that's a potential until they actually had that direct experience. So going back, I didn't know what the potentials were from taking that Wim Hof course until I went and got with Wim.
So you've worked directly with...
Oh, many times.
How does that go?
I trained Wim's... I worked as a teacher to the teachers for 4 years. Pre-COVID, we were training the up-and-coming instructors in the United States. I was part of the very first group of international instructors who trained directly with Wim.
How does that conversation happen? Because he's kind of like this weird mythical unicorn. You're like, you just find him on a mountaintop, and you're like, hey, I want in on this.
I found him in Beverly Hills.
That's not what I thought you were going to say.
I was in Beverly. I found him in Beverly Hills. No, it was under the guise of the very first. It was a congregation kind of came together of people who are interested in maybe becoming an instructor under him.
Because this was before he was as prominent as he is today.
He really, like, for instance, he hadn't been on Joe Rogan. He hadn't done certain things that really boosted his career.
He was known, but only in very, very select circles.
Yeah, and it was in the athletic world.
Yeah.
I mean, ultimately, look, I'll show you the pictures. I mean, you would be amazed at the amount of alpha that showed up that first time. I mean,
a lot of probably, like you said, martial artists,
fitness fanatics, just
looking for that 1%.
Yeah, it's like all the people that are
break
really
through the ceiling.
Yeah, they're trying to get to the end of the spectrum. So,
right.
yeah.
Here's something that you're kind of telling me that and the reason I'm excited. So I get in the cold probably 5 days a week. I've gone up to like 10 or 11 minutes at 40 degrees, but it's never what I would consider enjoyable. I do it I get out, and like you said, I feel good. I kind of have a dopamine release, almost like you just had a great workout. You feel proud of yourself. You overcame something challenging. It's the worst part before I get into my day, like those 5 minutes leading up to it. But what you're suggesting that I could do better, and what I want to learn about, is you could actually feel good while you're in that cold exposure. It's not that you're only doing it and purposely feeling cold, but not only feel good, but you can almost feel warm. Is this
good? Is good? Yes, absolutely.
Good
but
is
I would say it's relative. Yeah,
right. You're still in 40 degrees.
Yeah.
But you're saying like Wim controlled his breath and maintained his temperature. We should be able to replicate that and do the breathing. And
we can replicate that.
So is that part of your daily breath work? Like today, for example, is there cold exposure as well, or not yet?
For me, personally, well, I do it in different ways. So a lot of times with these workshops, especially with a large group, I don't do cold exposure with everybody. It's kind of like the trainer working out. It's just it's terrible, right? My focus is 100%. Yeah, my focus is 100% on the clients. So I am with you guys now. Tomorrow, for instance, I'll be back at home, and I'm doing a lot of cold exposure with my family. My family's really into it these days, and so especially in the summertime, they really like the cold then. So, but I don't let them skimp, man. We do a big, 250 pounds of ice in one tub. We go big, and so I'll spend tomorrow probably 20, 30 minutes in the ice.
In one exposure, or
typically my exposures are like that. Typically, now, and I want to back up and talk about something that there's a famous scientist who's becoming famous in this world. Her name is Suzanne Soderbergh, and she has a principle about how much exposure you should get weekly, and anybody who's interested should look her up, Susanna Soderbergh.
What did they say, like 11 minutes?
It's 11 minutes.
Yeah.
11 minutes throughout the week, so that's an accumulation throughout the week, so that could be 2 or 3 minutes at a time, and that's usually what I try to recommend people to, and to be honest, there are definitely ice bath days that's my extent. 2 to 3 minutes in the ice. Use it as a way to...
That's what I do. I very rarely exceed 3 minutes.
I just want adaption, and then I use it as like I call it the best pre-workout that there is.
So you do pre-workout?
Oh, yeah, man, my favorite time to do the cold is first thing in the morning.
Really?
Yeah, I don't know if it's my favorite, but it works best for me. It's kind of miserable, to be honest. I mean, it's cold, it's dark, or it's just dark usually in the morning, and I do it outside. My cold tub is set up outside, so I'll go and jump in and do, it just depends. Most of the time in the morning, it'll be a shorter one. But then if I'm looking for recovery, that's where I'm getting 20, 30 minutes sitting in the ice.
The morning thing, that makes sense to me because
gets your day.
I just like do the hardest thing you're probably going to do that day right out of the gate. Everything else tends to be like not a big deal after that.
Yeah, and this really brings me to the whole concept, going back to this idea of mindset, breath work, and cold. When I look at it as it's a chore in a sense, but it's a chore that I don't mind. It's just something that when I go through it, I have to set the intention every single time. You can't get into the cold without setting the intention of, all right, I'm about to do this. You know what I mean? Whatever it is, because there are days where I wake up where I don't want to do it, but I don't really see.
I never have ever wanted to do it.
My wife will be like, "Why are you hanging out with me right now?" I'm like, "I'm just avoiding getting in the cold."
Right.
Like, I'm like
that's
doing
why I do it
everything I can.
early before anybody can get in my way.
And so you do your breath before that as well, or first thing into the ice?
Sometimes the breath work is first, right? And sometimes it's just straight to the cold water.
But is one of the practices doing the 30 breaths and then getting
Sure.
So even when you don't do the
so
breath.
if I was going to give somebody a protocol, do 20 or 30 minutes of the breath work first to prime yourself. This is a type of breath work where I want to be very focused on what is coming. So, if I'm working with any type of performance, it's going to be, we really want to be in the moment, in the zone, not allowing ourselves to drift off and go into, these more, like I said, transpersonal, nonlinear spaces, right? We want to stay very focused, right? So I like to turn on as much as I can in that type of breath work and then go to the cold. So if you're going to do 20 or 30 minutes, then cold exposure, and what we'll be exposed to today is the post-cold training. The post-cold training is, to me, the real gold in the Wim Hof method. And that's bringing the stimulus of the cold and the breath work together in a way that helps to, let's say, stoke the response, which is thermogenesis. So our body wants to get warm. Well, we can influence that warmth. We can make it so that it gets warmer quicker. And we don't have to do burpees and snatches and cleans and squats, right? We can do it internally, turning the focus inward with that energy and using the breath to directly connect into this this exact response.
I've got two questions. One is, how much do you play around, or if at all, with kind of contrast? Like, do you do any sauna work or anything like that? Because we have both here, and I like to do both. It's probably just because I'm freezing and I want to get warmed up.
Right.
But how much do you play around with that?
I like contrast some.
Okay.
But
does it mitigate the benefits of cold? I guess would be a better question.
A little bit.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you talk to like someone like Soderbergh, she would tell you to get warm, let your body warm itself.
That was leading into my second question, because I think it was.
This is where the real deep benefits of the cold come into play, is actually in the post-cold.
Right, a lot of people get cold and then give me the hottest thing you can, hot tub, sauna.
Well, that's where I was going to go, because I was either reading or listening to Andrew Huberman talking about trying not to do cold exposure too late in the day, because now your body's warming. Right. Later in the evening, when you should be trying to cool down when you go to sleep.
Absolutely. And your body comes online first thing. The sympathetic kicks on, and your body wants to warm up first thing in the morning.
Right.
So it really does. To me, the whole idea of the practice would be that we don't fully come online. You know what I mean? When we wake up in the morning, right? And this brings everything.
We're all on dial-up, and you're on Wi-Fi, right? Is that what's good?
Well, I'm just saying, you know how it feels when you come out of the cold.
Right.
You're awake.
You're awake.
Yeah.
You're awake.
You're
ready to go.
As soon as you get in, you're like, all right.
Yeah,
I'm ready. I'm fully,
But
this is full power mode.
I'm excited to learn about that, because another person kind of talking about cold is Liver King these days.
Yeah.
And he talks about, he goes equal time out of the cold, he calls it, I think, the shiver.
Mm-hmm, the
post-cold.
Shiver. Yeah.
Right, so I'm interested, because I'm like Fern. I'm like, okay, I've done it. Let's get warm. And I often do it at night, so I'm interested in seeing what happens if I switch to the mornings.
Well, I was having trouble with it. My sleep was getting all messed up, because I was having trouble, getting to sleep, because I was doing it so late in the day. I would do it, right before I would leave to go home, which is 6 o'clock at night.
It's because we put off the hardest thing. That's literally what we're doing, right? We're like, this is going to be terrible.
Well, some of it was just ignorance. I didn't know. I was like, I got to get it in, and then I should have just made the 2 to 3 minutes for it in the morning, and then gone about my day, and then I would have been done. So that was the other thing I was curious about, and what you're.
Well, so the way I see it with my brain, I was like thinking about something when you were talking about that. No, it's all right, man.
I'm always thinking about something else.
It was really just the. So ask me again one more time.
So just my questions were kind of like around like when you should do it in the day, but I think I just kind of want to get confirmation from you that like you don't want to do this too late in the day because now you're warming or cooling at the wrong time.
Some people really like so there's going to be a big shift between sympathetic and parasympathetic when you go through the cold, right? You get into the cold and you're hit. Everything, it's like you have to make that conscious choice to stay in, right? Especially the way we do it, because the way I recommend is that as you get into the cold, it's an even kind of seating process, however it is. If you're getting into a tub, you're letting yourself down nice and even, but then you want to get that water all the way over your chest. Everything into the water initially if you can. Hands, feet, everything's in the water, right? The water's all the way up over the chest, maybe right around your neck and jaw. And at that point, you're going to have as intense an adaptation experience as you can. Whatever it is.
Hands. My hands is the worst part.
So I always tell people if your hands are bothering you, if you're panicky in that way, to bring your hands out. If you initially bring them in, then it gives you that ability to take them out, and that will help calm you down. I try to give people that, like a frame of a window to say, get your breath under control in 10 to 15 breaths if you can.
That's usually what I try to do when I get it. I'm like, I try to get not relaxed, but I try to get to some state of calm and within about 30 seconds.
Yeah.
So I get in and I immediately start breathing. I'm like, okay,
and
I'm
30
good.
seconds might even be a little long. You know what I mean?
I'm not a high achiever.
Well, and I that could be perfect for you, but for some people, 30 seconds can seem like an eternity. You know what I mean? So what we're trying to do is get people to. It's gonna inevitably adaptation takes a little longer than 30 seconds. It's gonna be probably 45 seconds, right, for full adaptation into the.
That feels about right.
Yeah. So, but the breathing, you can get your breath under control quicker than that. Some people will totally try to resist, right? The key is in the exhale, because the exhale is what allows you to shift from that deep fight and flight or sympathetic state into a more sympathetic or parasympathetic.
Whenever you see people panic, they're like,
yeah, right.
And they're not exhaling.
Right. Well, they can't get it out. It's, you see them continuously drawing air in or trying to, when the reality is that you could use something like the physiological sigh in response, which is multiple inhales to a long exhale, right? And that will help settle you. Huberman talks about that one, and it's like taking 3... so that you utilize this natural autonomic response that does shift us into parasympathetic, or at least into more of a parasympathetic state, right? But being able to witness that, going through initially the mindset, which is we step in, then we have the exposure, and we shift from that fight and flight state into a more relaxed, adapted state, right? Still very heightened, but relaxed at this point. And this lends to dilation. We went from deep constriction into a more of a dilated state, right, where we're opening up. And then the dopamine, or the basically the reward system, kicks in. Because you went through this process, now you've actually attained a reward system, which is extremely beneficial for the day. And it is, why we see people who are in recovery, for instance, coming to this type of practice, because it really helps them find balance, and it is such an increase in dopamine. So that is the reward system. And then we get out, and then if you let your body naturally warm, this will, this brings on all the benefits of fat burning. For instance, the shivering lends towards fat burning. But what we try to do within the Wim Hof practice, at least my goal has always been to experience non-shiver thermogenesis.
That was my next question, because one of the things about, when freedive, obviously there's a significant risk of death in freediving if you do this wrong. But one of the golden rules of freediving, at least that they told me when I learned it, was when you start shivering, you're done. you're done diving because oxygen consumption goes up like 500%.
Oh yeah.
And they were like,
absolutely.
This is not a time to do anything dangerous. Like, but if I'm like, hey, can you control that a little bit more by working in some of these other, could you do, higher frequency of dives or maybe stay in a little bit longer? But that's like the golden rule of free diving. They're like, if you start shivering, there is no more diving. You're done because of the risk that you now enter into the equation now.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you're right. That's when I would pull people out of the water too. Is if I see them cold and they're in there and they're shivering, it's not a great idea. And I actually think it's something that probably should be remarked on, is because I have heard people mention that shivering is where you burn fat, and so people think that, well, maybe I should shiver. I don't think that's a good idea at all. And this is like so people typically come to the Wim Hof practice, I think, is a novel thing. Like they want the experience, right? But maybe they don't intend to turn it into a lifetime of work, right? And then you will have your people that definitely stick. To me, it comes down to that post-cold training that makes it a higher art form, that really gives you something to want to repetitively practice. And the benefits of that are creating a body that responds differently to those post-cold effects, which would be shivering, right? So that shivering is your body trying to get warm.
Right.
We give it a direction to go to get warm. And this definitely comes through practices like breathing, meditation, visualization to some degree. You know what I mean? But it's something that you can get a hold of pretty quickly. But if you really want to get deep into the mastery of it, it's something that you're going to practice regularly.
And realistically, that's probably where like most of our listeners are probably going to dabble, and where I would probably find most of them would settle is like a novice in both of these kind of trainings, which is like they're probably not going to deep dive into it and go spend the rest of their life doing it, but adding some degree of these practices, both cold exposure and breathing, could have kind of pretty significant impacts on your training, your health, recovery, all that kind of stuff. And this is kind of where people are like, give me the goods, man. Like, how does this make me better at the thing that I do? So I see obviously there's the mental aspect of both of these. It's just like learning to control your thoughts, learning to deal with panic, learning to, kind of like clear your mind under duress.
Elevate moods significantly.
Right. And then obviously there's a lot of studies and research on like training in hypoxic states, but I see it happen. But what I think needs to be clarified there is that's done intentionally. What I see happen is the opposite. So there's a couple of things that you'll see very regularly in kind of high intensity environments. You'll see people unaware that they're holding their breath, and it typically happens in two places. Number one, like at the level ones, 3, 2, 1, go. We do the first workout. They're doing thrusters, and they're 5 reps in, and they have not taken a single breath. And I'm like, you're behind the 8 ball, and you're probably not going to catch up now. The other place I do it is in one place that probably is most people are unaware is if they're climbing rope, because there's like a little degree of fear there, and when somebody gets scared, they go. They're just doing the thing, and they come back down and they do like 1 rope climb, 2 rope climbs, and immediately they're out of breath. And it's like, this is where the value of some of that stuff is just like learning to control that, or learning to just create some degree of awareness so that I can take this and I can apply it to my training so I get a better outcome for my training. I don't need to do more like Jason was talking about. I just need to do that singular training session significantly better.
Well, having a preemptive breath, like when you're going into something, is a great way to do it, right? Not holding your breath as you're entering in. So, for instance, with the water, I try to get people breathing and really into their body before they get into the water so that the breath doesn't just come out of nowhere, the breath response, right? And if you, for instance, with the rope, you can, it's fear is fear. Wim's techniques were, I think, seeing a common thread and then simulating. So he's an extreme climber, an alpinist. He was doing free climbing and free soloing, things like that. So breath control is really important.
Yeah, panicking is kind of a big deal.
Yeah. And so there's the alpinist aspect of the breath training, the yogic breath training that Wim had been exposed to because he's a very high level yogi, and then having the cold exposure too, and all of these things, just seeing this common thread and then starting to simulate the breathing response, the panic breathing response, and learning how to do that in a very controlled, comfortable way so that you can essentially start to generate the effects before they kick in. So what we try to do is train out like adrenaline dumps in people, right? So that they don't have that fear going into competition.
Right.
Right? Because that
You
can
wanna do it
happen.
beforehand.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
want to get you primed so that when you enter in, you're in as close to a flow state and completely controlled as you could be, right? You know, you're already in the zone.
So this, like what you're talking about here, and I don't mean to cut you off, but from a practical purpose in a CrossFit gym, this is where you can layer in things. So right before, we like to recommend that people do what we call like a test round before they actually hit the workout, which is like a really short burst of whatever they're about to do, and then we're going to take a break, and then we're going to go into the workout after that. But like trying to maximize that. Can we get a little bit of that adrenaline dump, like get their breathing in a state so that when they get to the workout, they're already in that kind of like flow state already?
Yeah, well, what the breathing does over the course of 20 minutes is bring peak adrenaline state up in the body. So we've shown having as much adrenaline after the breath work as somebody doing a skydive. But they're getting it like that. And we're building it up over the course of, say, 20 or 30 minutes. And that adrenaline suppresses inflammation. You know, I mean, there's a lot of things that are going on chemically there, but ultimately the having the adrenaline already in the system in that way brings you into a mental state where you're ready to perform now, and you're controlled, you're calm. So that's one really significant reason to train the breath or to use it right before you enter into something. I mean, I've heard a lot of great performers saying that they've noticed such a difference in regards to using breath work when they weren't doing it before, right? There was something else there.
I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, it's all right.
You were talking about that, and I wanted to, just because of the nature of our audience, I didn't want that to like slip out.
It's just about results. And to me, the recovery aspect of the training, or when we're building muscle, it's probably not great to try and build muscle and then go jump into the cold right after that, right? The pro-inflammatory effects that occur when strength training, we need that inflammation prior or post training, right? Mm-hmm. So I would say it's almost better to use the cold briefly before a workout, and to see, how much better you perform, before.
How long? Couple minutes?
2 to 3 minutes.
Okay.
Adaption, 3 minutes.
And then how long before the training session? Like half hour?
Right before.
Like literally right before?
Could be. Doesn't have to be, but it could be right before. I mean, it could be right up to the time where the whole idea is you're going to see your body perform. And I mean, hormonally speaking, you're taking advantage of everything that naturally your body will provide.
Yeah.
Right? And then you're able to see the effects of not overheating so fast.
Bathroom breaks and
You
the
know what
lesson
I
plan
mean?
just got a little longer.
Yeah.
Hop in, everybody.
Yeah. I mean, well, it's I mean, it's not, maybe not for everybody, but I have seen tremendous results utilizing this type of protocol.
I think, big picture, like you guys are discussing, what can we do to maximize this 1 hour for a lot of our clients, or for the people that want more? It doesn't need to be more inside the box, but perhaps being outside the box.
Yeah, I mean,
the
if you
best
get
way,
10 to
quickest way.
15% more out of
With less training.
with less training, or even the same amount of training, but like adding a couple of pieces onto that, I don't know anybody that wouldn't take an extra 10 to 15%.
And like you suggested, it's going to make you just a better person. Yeah. You'll be happier, healthier, stronger by doing this.
That was what I found out, right? So I came into it for one reason, and the reason that I stuck around is for so many things, right? And what I noticed right away was that everybody who was there to train the method wasn't there for my reasons. People, I would say the majority of the people come to the Wim Hof method, and it's something that I ask within the groups, all my groups that I work with. Are you here, if you had to really narrow it down, because people will try to give me a million different answers. I just want happy, healthy, strong. Why are you here? What is it that you really want to benefit from? And most people say happy. Most people in this, I mean, it's not, and that's at gyms. You know, I mean, like, what are you looking for in life? You want to be happy, healthy, or strong? Most people say happy. And I guess they think maybe being healthy and strong relates to that too. You know what I mean? But not necessarily. I mean, it's.
I think it'd be hard to be healthy and strong if you weren't happy to some degree.
Well, I think so. I mean, they're all interconnected.
Right.
But there are plenty of people who train hard, and you know, and even have a decent lifestyle, but still, man, there's that thing.
Right.
You know.
Very
and,
unhappy.
Yeah, and then there are, and it could be, some people are, you know, happy people. They're okay, but they don't feel healthy. They don't feel like they're meeting their potentials. And strength can bring about healthy, right? I mean, they all play on each other, but there are plenty of people who would say, I'm not strong enough. You know what I mean?
Right.
And the method can give you an increase in strength for sure, through motivation, through intention, through intensity. You know, if you get yourself into the right mental state, you can create much more intensity in the gym. I think we all know that, right? So,
dude, I want to keep doing this, but we're gonna.
Yeah, we gotta go learn it ourselves.
Yeah,
we're at the workshop right now.
We're gonna stop talking about it, and we're gonna be about it. Where else can people find you outside of the Enlifted workshops? Where's the best place to kind of like dive into what you're doing?
Well, I have a studio in Charlotte, North Carolina. You can always come and see me. But I also have you know, websites and social media.
What's your website?
My website is onfire.com. onphyr.com, onphyr.com, and then there's Brandon Powell 396 on social media.
Okay.
And that's it.
Well,
Awesome. I'm super excited.
You can also find me on the Wim Hof site. If you look up Wim Hof instructors,
pop up there.
Yeah, I will.
And then people can. I'm assuming
Level
they can.
3.
Level 3. I'm assuming people can set up workshops if they wanted you to come to their facility. They can do all that.
Absolutely. I do a lot of workshops with CrossFit.
Cool.
And so, you know, we find people who are really game and who really want to do this.
That's
I mean,
cool.
this is a real thing, right? And it's
it's
something you're going to know you went through this experience. This is not a what happened today? You know, you're going to know it.
Today's going to be epic. I've already decided.
I'm really excited for you to try it because I want you to be happier.
Then I'm going to need a new partner for that. So, listen, dude, this has been fantastic. Thank you. I'm really stoked about today.
Thank you. And we got to get this guy into jiu-jitsu, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
I'm down. So, you guys missed it. If you weren't here, I'm sorry for you, but we'll see you next time. Thanks for checking out this episode of the Best Hour of Their Day podcast. We appreciate you listening and choosing to have us help you in your passion for coaching and affiliate ownership. You can find more episodes just like this on all podcast platforms. If you're interested in learning more, you can reach out to us on any social media platforms, or you can visit www.besthouroftheirday.com to book a call. If you found this episode helpful for you, please share it so that we can help other coaches and affiliate owners to help build a bigger and stronger CrossFit community. Thanks for listening.